Well, good morning. Let's get started, y'all. It's great to see you back in Sunday school, and great to see y'all in this room. For the last month, while Bill Wortman has been in here, I've been upstairs with 4K through second grade, and it's been a treat to be with St. Lucers of another age. I'm really tickled to see how really all ages are finding the Lord here and studying God's Word here, and it was really, really fun. But I got to tell you, I'm real glad to be back with the grown-ups and not sitting on the floor. So speaking of that, everybody needs a red or a black Bible that's in the little cart in the middle. But if you notice, they're all colored up marker. So the reason why they're all marked up, and they're getting a little shop worn, but I really love them because these are the same Bibles that we do Bible Club with. The Bible Club starts back up, I think this week, if not this week, next week. And we have 3rd through 6th grade, heavy on 3rd graders. And what we do after school is everybody gets one of these Bibles because they all have the same page numbers. I do the same thing with you that we do at Bible Club. And then I'll call out a book, a chapter, and a verse. We learn how to look up things. We learn about the Old Testament, the New Testament. And the children will race to the story. The boys try to beat the girls. And then they'll highlight whatever we've read. And they just love the sort of just kind of the physical nature of it, if you will. It's like a scavenger hunt. And then we talk about the story. And it is so much fun. We're up to about 50 children right now, and they just love it. They come again and again. So if you know someone between 3rd and 6th grade rather, and they would like to come to Bible Club, that's after school, starts about 3:30. We're done by 4:15. And it's just been magic. So when we look through the Bible, and today I think today you're going to see some highlighted stuff because I love the Gospel of Mark. You'll just know that there's a little one that's been reading these stories with you. So this class is titled "The Gospels: One Story, Four Voices," because I have a premise, if you will. I'm convinced that most Jesus movies are really bad because they gobble up the stories, the four voices, into one story. I guess they kind of have to. But what I want us to imagine in this semester as we read together is the Gospels can be seen as individual screenplays. A screenplay is a very intentional way of telling a story. It may take a book and boil it down. It may take a memory. I'm thinking of the Bob Dylan movie, the Timothy Chalamet. They didn't tell the whole story of Bob Dylan. They didn't tell you where he grew up, or they mentioned where he grew up, but you didn't go back to Minnesota. You didn't even do the whole life of Bob Dylan. Really, you just did Bob Dylan from his arrival in Greenwich Village until the Newport Jazz Festival of 1965 when he used an electric guitar and made everybody mad. There you go. And so that's a focused account of a window into the life of Bob Dylan. Same thing happens with the Gospels. They all tell the same story in a very different way. Now, you can see harmony between the stories. There are basic things that are universal, but take any four of us, especially if four of us were of different ages and from different places, we're going to tell the story in a different way. We're simply going to tell it through the lens of our experience, especially if we're telling the story of an event that's the same distance, say, from today to the Vietnam War. If we were to tell a story of the Vietnam War today, we still can't help but tell it through the lens of however we understand geopolitics right now. Heard a fascinating presentation at Dawson Convention yesterday from these two men who run a church in Orlando, Florida. Presbyterian church, but this idea translates. So that the reason why there's no stigma around non-church attendance anymore is because of the fall of the Berlin Wall. And I thought, what? And he said, no, the fall of the Berlin Wall is a foundational event in our own culture because for those of us who are of an age, and not everyone here is old enough to remember this, but before the fall of the Berlin Wall, remember the big enemy was communism everywhere. It was Western Christianity versus godless communism. But when godless communism went away, so did the stigma around being a godless American. And so people aren't necessarily compelled to identify with the church or go to a church like they were before the fall of the Berlin Wall. Okay, so all that said is the Gospels are told looking back through a lot of history, because the earliest of these was written around the year 70. They're not the oldest books in the Bible. So the first thing you want to know when we talk about, can I say screenplay? I like to say that. Okay, so when we talk about these screenplays, is that they're not the oldest. Actually, the oldest scripture in the New Testament is 1 Thessalonians, written in the year 51. A guy named Paul is converted, meets Jesus on the road to Damascus. We know briefly the story of Paul. He never changes his name. He had two names. He had a Roman name and a Jewish name, Saul and Paul. But as Paul, in his Roman iteration, as a business person, he travels into Europe and tells them, 18 years after the resurrection, the story of Jesus. I mean, those are the earliest writings. And so people were telling stories about Jesus for a long time. But something happened in the year 70. The temple in Jerusalem was destroyed, and the Gospels were written as a result. Now, this should make sense to us. If you've been with me for a while, and you know I love history and sort of put things on a timeline, there was another event that caused things to happen. 600 years before Jesus' birth, something that we call the exile, the Babylonian exile. God's people were all swooped up by the Mesopotamian superpower and taken away to a faraway city. This was their way of sort of world domination. They like to remove people from their culture so they could make sort of a Mesopotamian one world order. I mean, they were the bad boys of that part of the world. And so while they're living way out there all by themselves, wondering if they'll ever go home again, God called a prophet, Ezekiel, way out there. They only thought that prophets could be called, within proximity of the temple or in God's house. And they realized that they didn't need the temple. They had each other. And so they wrote the Bible. They lost everything and they wrote the Bible. In the year 70, they lost the temple again. The Romans destroyed it. And both Jews and Christians got busy. Christians wrote the Gospels and began to have a record, if you will, of the life and death and resurrection of Jesus. And then our Jewish friends began the form of rabbinic Judaism that we see today at Temple Emmanuel downtown. Both of these were a response to the loss of the temple. So I want you to know that the Gospels are something as a result of something else. We needed to have something we could go to again and again, an experience of Jesus where we are in our home, not something that you travel to, but rather something in our hearts. So the first of these screenplays was Mark. Okay, something I teach our Bible Club kids every Wednesday afternoon rather. The Bible is not a book. It's not a book. It's a library of books. In fact, the word Bible means books. And so they're a library of books, and they're arranged in a way. Our Jewish friends have the same Old Testament that we do, their Hebrew scriptures, but it's arranged differently. It's not arranged the same way. And so they've got the Torah and the writings and the prophets. They call it the Tanakh, but it's the same words. But we have an Old and a New Testament, and it's all arranged in a certain way so that we can find them. However, it's unfortunate that it's not arranged chronologically. Also, remember the books of the gospel books are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, right? Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. So there are four, and we're going to talk about all four. One story, four voices. But it's unfortunate that Acts comes after John because Acts is a sequel to Luke. So it's got John in the middle. Well, also, Mark is the second one, but it's actually the oldest. So you might be interested to know that all of Mark is within the book of Matthew and Luke. It's shorter. So when I was coming along in seminary, there were people who wondered if Mark were not sort of an incomplete voice, an incomplete gospel, because it's not as long as the other ones. And because it's enfolded within Matthew and Luke, we call the first three the synoptic gospels, which is a mouthful. It just simply means they're told from the same point of view. So if you look at the first three voices, you're going to see some similarities. However, what Matthew and Luke did was add material that they had, a memory that they had from someone or dictated to them from someone else that they didn't have. So for instance, in Matthew's gospel, you get the Sermon on the Mount. That's not in Mark. Here's a big one, and we're going to solve this mystery today. In Mark's gospel, there's no Christmas. Turn with me to Mark chapter 1, and it's on page 812. It's different. It's the shortest. Now, I will. While you're turning to page 812, I will tell you this. I got it immediately. People wondered if Mark was incomplete. I don't think so at all. I'm a big fan of short stories in the New Yorker magazine. I love short stories because I have a short attention span. And so for people like me who are always moving on, I love a well-written short story because they're tight. You can usually read them in a sitting, and not a word is wasted. The same here with Mark's gospel. I really believe that in terms of literary value, if you love terse, quick writing, something that's a story that's well told, Mark's gospel is it. Now, another thing about this screenplay, this voice, if you will, treat yourself. Okay, the season of Lent's coming up, and I like to say that for that 40 days. I know people give up chocolate or, stuff like that. Try to take something on for the season of Lent. And why don't you try to read Mark's gospel as a whole in a sitting? It'll take you 45 minutes. You can read the thing and you'll see things you've never seen before. We'll talk about these as we continue to talk about this voice, but you will see things in the story. You'll go, whoa! You'll see Jesus circle back. You'll see things happen in the same place. You'll see scripture fulfilled. It's amazing. And so if you just treat yourself and look at it and not chop it up into little bits like we usually have to do, it's really, really cool. And it's also better than those Jesus movies out there that sort of mash all the stories up together. So Mark begins differently, and why don't we read it? And then I'll ask the question, why? And we'll see if we can solve the mystery. The beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Okay, this is the start, right? The start of the story. What's the beginning? As it is written in the prophet Isaiah, I'm sending my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare your way. The voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord and make his path straight. And John the Baptizer appeared in the wilderness, proclaiming a baptism of repentance for the forgiveness of sins. And people from the whole Judean countryside and all the people of Jerusalem were going out to him, were baptized by him in the river Jordan, confessing their sins. Now John was clothed with camel's hair and a leather belt around his waist. He ate locust and wild honey. And he proclaimed, the one who is more powerful than I is coming after me. I am not worthy to stoop down and untie the thong of his sandals. I baptize you with water, but he will baptize you with the Holy Spirit. Okay, that's the beginning. I mean, there's no Joseph and Mary. There's no Bethlehem. There's no star in the east. There's no three wise men. There's no little drummer boy. I mean, what's the deal, right? It's John the Baptist in the wilderness. Well, I'm going to start and say that the answer to this question comes from two things that I love to talk about, which are history and economics. And so I'm going to show you a picture and walk you through a thought experiment. I've done this with some groups that I've taken to Israel, but not every group, because our itinerary is different. But what I want you to imagine is you're with me in the Holy Land, the place where Jesus lived and did his ministry, and I'm gonna get you to enter into the world of Christ. And so our first stop on the way to Nazareth, and then eventually to Capernaum, where Jesus lived and performed his ministry on the shore of the lake, on our way is a place called Caesarea Maritima. It's on the coast, and you may have heard of Caesarea Philippi. There are two Caesareas. Both of these cities were built in honor of Caesar Augustus, who was the client. Herod would be a client king of the most powerful man on earth, which would be the Roman emperor. So Herod would build this port city. It's really an ingenious. He used a newly invented underwater concrete to create a harbor where there'd been no harbor, a port where there was no port. And so much commerce came through this place that it made Herod, who, by the way, was Idumean, not even Jewish, made him the king of the Jews. He's the only person with that title. Hence the irony of the sign above Jesus' head on Good Friday. Here lies the king of the Jews. But Herod became the third richest man in the world. Literally the third richest man in the world. It would be Augustus, Marcus Agrippa, and Herod because of this place. Here's the thought experiment I want us to run us through really quickly. This is a sarcophagus. So this is some dude's coffin. And I want you to notice the artistry. That's a carved Medusa head there, and it's really, really pretty. It's got a mechanism, if you will, for a lid. It's very, very heavy. It's made of beautiful marble, and it's very ornate, even carved along the edges there. I mean, it's truly lovely. Okay, the first thing I want you to know about this as we think about this sarcophagus is this is made of marble, which is not indigenous to Israel anywhere. They don't have marble. Now, bought anything from Amazon lately? What is shipping calibrated on, right? Distance and weight. This is real heavy, guys. So there's no telling what this cost to have this shipped. And this is some dude's coffin. How much money has this guy got, right? And if this is what he's got to spend his money on. So this piece of marble has to be shipped and carved. I mean, this is really, really, really expensive stuff. And it's ironic because at St. Luke's, most of the old guys I know are going for the cheapest funeral possible. I remember we have a beautiful columbarium outside St. Luke's. We built this thing called a scattering garden, and it was just for people who wanted really something even more natural, where your ashes go into the dirt and it's beautiful. I had several old guys really fired up because they thought that was like a potter's field. They were going to get like a cut rate funeral. I say, no, we charge the same for everybody, okay? It's $1,800, bud. But that's Birmingham. Okay, that's just cheap Birmingham old men. But Romans love to spend a bunch of money on a coffin. So can you imagine what kind of palace this guy lived in? What kind of bathhouses? How many slaves? All that. Okay, so that's the first thing we see in the morning as we're beginning to immerse you into the world of Jesus. By the way, Jesus never went to Caesarea Maritima. Pontius Pilate lived there. As a matter of fact, that was the governor's palace, and is a nice place to stay. It had an infinity pool, good view of the ocean. He only went into Jerusalem when they gathered for the festival, when 1 million people would come to town for the Passover, and he had to make sure that the locals weren't restive. And occasionally you got to crucify somebody, put them to death, just to kind of keep the peace. You see how the story has a historic and a political ring to it? Jesus never went here. St. Paul was in prison for 2 years here. We learned this at the end of the book of Acts. But other than that, this is not a Bible place when it comes to the Gospels. Where did Jesus go? Well, over half the Gospels take place here at Capernaum. Let's continue our thought experiment here. We saw the Roman technology of a marble sarcophagus. What do we see here? Something certainly less sophisticated. Mud and rocks. They're not even equal size rocks. It's not like they're using technology to carve a rock. They're just piling rocks. And that's Capernaum. Capernaum sits in a seismic area around the Sea of Galilee, so the rocks are basalt. They're volcanic rock. They're black rock, and they're all sorts of sizes. It kind of looks to me like, dare I say, this is the hometown of Jesus. Dare I say, looks like a trailer park. I mean, it's a little honky tonk, and I would imagine that it didn't smell very good. Cook fires, kind of burning inside. People sleeping with their animals. Uneven rocks. There's no glass for windows or anything. You just have these open holes. I mean, this looks like just like bad Lego, and it's very, very poor. This is where the Gospels happen. They don't happen in a fancy city. You can even see a Roman city from Capernaum across the lake. Sea of Galilee, by the way, they didn't have a word for lake. If you live in a world with very little water, everything was a sea, if it was sizable at all. And so the Sea of Galilee is about 7 miles wide at its widest and about 11 miles long, which means you can always see to the other side. And from here, you can see a Roman city, Tiberias. Jesus never went there. He didn't go there. He didn't go places of wealth. He didn't go where power would be located. He didn't go to places of government, except to Jerusalem to worship, which he was required to do by his religion. Other than that, he hung out places like this. Which brings me, by the way, I'm going to answer my question, why did Mark start that way, in just a moment. I've got some more to show you, okay, another mystery. So while you're in Capernaum, you can't help but notice, and that might be some of y'all in this class, in this picture, there's this huge Roman building in the middle of Capernaum. This is the synagogue of Capernaum. Now, there are 3 ways that someone will explain this synagogue, and it depends on the group you go with, and it depends on your pastor and your guide. So we are told that this is the synagogue of Capernaum. A less thoughtful guide, or someone just there with a large church group from Texas, I'm being ugly, in matching T-shirts, their guide will say, this is where it happened, friends. Jesus healed a demon right here, pulled him out of his mind. He was rolling around. Jesus healed him. First miracle right here where you're standing. And everybody's like, wow, that was worth the money. Come over here. Okay, that's the first story, and that's not the story. A more helpful explanation is that this is a Roman synagogue. Now remember, this looks more like the sarcophagus, right, than the rocks. I'm getting you coached up on with a little bit of archaeological eye. This looks a little more like the first thing that we saw. So what most guidebooks, coffee table books, educated guides will say is this is the Roman synagogue of Capernaum from the early 4th century. So there you go. That's better. That's better than saying that that's the one. And it's built over the synagogue. Oftentimes archaeology is in layers, the science of layers. And so where Jesus walked is beneath the floor. And they even have a little hole cut out in the corner to show you how far below the 1st century ground would be. So you could see some little rocks and mud around like everything else around it. So imagine this little mud rock village right here dominated by this. Now, I have a Galilean friend, and a lot of y'all know this way way too much, as I tell you all the time, who's in a tank in Gaza right now. My friend Edon Geva. He pocket called me the other day. You ever pocket call anybody on your phone? I'm bad about that because I keep my phone in my front pocket. And I just call everybody. And I'm riding in my car, and I get a call from Edon Geva, and I'm like, what? And so unfortunately, I was in the car. I hit answer, hands-free kind of thing. And all I heard was this, his tank engine. And then Hebrew on the radio. So Edon was on patrol. Isn't that crazy? What a small world we live in. Anyway, Edon is from Galilee. He's actually from a kibbutz on the shore of the lake called En-Gev. And as such, he has a thoughtful explanation of life in the Galilee. And thanks to Edon, I'm going to be able to help you through the Gospels enter the world of Jesus in that way. And here's our lesson for today. This is not supposed to be here, this synagogue. People living in Capernaum didn't have 2 shekels to rub together in the year 33, and they didn't have 2 shekels to rub together in the year 333. All right? This doesn't belong. Doesn't look like a synagogue. It's not built like a synagogue. A synagogue has a square benches in the middle, a square of benches in the middle for the elders to sit and look at each other and debate. The tabernacle faces east. This does none of these things. What this is akin to the marble sarcophagus. So the answer is why? Why is this here? Well, if you open your history books, you learn that in the early 4th century, a man named Constantine, the ruler of the whole world after a series of civil wars, in gratitude and also looking for some glue to hold his empire together, made Christianity, in fits and starts, the official religion of the Roman Empire. Christianity brought to you by the Roman Empire. And which is very, very different than the rocks and the mud of Capernaum and Jesus and simple fishermen and these stories that we're going to learn as we learn these voices together. So what my friend Edon thinks, along with other thoughtful scientists and archaeologists, is that Constantine's mother, Helena, who was sent to the Holy Land with a blank check to build churches on holy sites, including Church of the Holy Sepulchre and Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem and places like that, that she or someone powerful like her built a synagogue to commemorate the first miracle of Jesus. And they built a synagogue with Roman stones these stones aren't from there, guys. This is limestone and marble, shipped at great cost, precisely cut, so that Roman people would have something better to look at than this. Wow, I spent all my denarii. I became a Christian because my wife had me baptized. I live up in Tuscany in a nice villa, and I travel all the way to Capernaum, and I'm looking at a trailer park. So they wanted to see something that looked like them, which is danger, which brings us to the economic and historic aspect of Mark's gospel. It's a scandal where Jesus lived. It's a scandal where Jesus lived to the point that Roman people wanted to build something that looked like them, which is always a danger for us because we will always be tempted to try to make Jesus into our own image, to make Jesus look like what we want Jesus to look like. When in fact, Jesus takes us to places, or will take us to places when we spend time with the story, will take us to places that we maybe didn't think we were going to go. So Roman people built something that they wanted to see. They built something that they wanted to spend money on, and therein lies a danger, which goes back to the first chapter, the beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. What is the good news? Well, as it was written in the prophet Isaiah, see, I'm sending my messenger ahead of you who will prepare your way, the voice of one crying out in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord and make his paths straight. Okay, you've got your Bibles open if you picked one up off the cart. I want y'all to turn back to Malachi 4, which is page 779. So just a little bit. 779. These are the last verses of the Old Testament, what we call the Old Testament. Very last verses. Malachi 4, verses, actually verses 5 and 6. 5 and 6. Malachi 4, verses 5 and 6, page 779. Lo, I will send you the prophet Elijah before the great and terrible day of the Lord comes. He will turn the hearts of parents to the children and the hearts of children to the parents, so that I will not come and strike the land with a curse. Last verses. I'm going to send you Elijah. Lo, God said through the prophet Malachi, I'm going to send Elijah. He's going to prepare your hearts, and the world's going to be a better place, right? And the Messiah is going to come, and it's going to turn the hearts of children to parents and parents to children. Wow, that's a beautiful dream. Now turn over, if you've got this Bible, turn over just one page, and there should be a blank page. Does anybody see 400 years written on there? Yes, I've got one upstairs. So this is one of our Bible club lessons. I say 400 years. And some little girl wrote 400 years, like wrote it out and exclamation point, like, dang, 400 years. That's right. 400 years between Malachi and the start of Mark. That's a long time to wait. You know, you have to wonder if God's people, like, looking at these words on the page going, is Elijah really coming? I mean, is this real? Because the Romans are now here and we're being taxed 98%, and right, and we're really sad, and where are you, God? You know, by the way, the Bible is remarkably consistent in this. It doesn't promise a rose garden. What it promises is that God is faithful and God will be with you, and God has got this, right? And God will pick you up, and God will dust you off, and God will protect you, and God will heal you. But it doesn't promise that things will be easy. The Bible never does. It starts in Genesis chapter 12. A man named Abraham, first Abram, later Abraham. All he wants is a kid and land to hand it down to, and God says, okay, if you leave a city, which is a theme we'll talk about this semester too. If you leave a city and go be different, just go be different, be with your family. The world will see that I'm real. The world will see how to live. You'll be a light to enlighten the world, and I'll give you that kid and the land to hand it down to. Now, he's already old, and Sarah's old. I mean, they're really old, and he can't even imagine this is going to come true. But he steps out on faith that God will be faithful to God's promise. But it doesn't happen until Genesis 22. So it's what starts in Genesis chapter 12, doesn't end in Genesis chapter 22. That's a long time to wait. That's a long, long time. And so even baked into the book of Genesis is this idea that sometimes you've got to wait on the Lord. And sometimes there's something right beyond the horizon we just can't see. However, along comes John the Baptist 400 years later. Looks like Elijah, sounds like Elijah. I got to tell you, the place where he preached down by the Jordan River, it sounds picturesque, but it's not. The Bible didn't tell us a lot about geography, but it is fascinating. I want you to use your imaginations for just a moment. Geographically, the land of Israel is the same size as Alabama. And running north-south, so let's just say I-65 is a crack in the earth between two tectonic plates, between Asia and Africa, and then in the north between Europe and Asia, so that you've got the lowest place on planet Earth runs along I-65. That's the Jordan River Valley, with the Jordan River at the bottom. Sea of Galilee at the top, the Jordan River runs through it, ending at the Dead Sea at the bottom. Dead Sea be down near Dothan. And right, and then the Sea of Galilee would be up around Huntsville, and we would be in the middle. We would be Jerusalem. We'd be Jerusalem. So there you go. Now think about that. Now, what I want you to imagine for just a second is it's a cold day in the winter in Jerusalem. They get all their rain in the wintertime, by the way. This is just where it is. But Jerusalem and Birmingham get the same weather in the winter. And they even get snow. They could probably get more snow than we do. And just so imagine it's a snowy, nasty, cold day in Jerusalem. And it's the weekend. It's the Sabbath. I once asked Edon, what do you do on the Sabbath? So the Sabbath runs from sundown Friday to sundown Saturday. And I used to be worried about it. I've been to Israel a lot. And I remember my first time, I thought, the Sabbath, is that going to be just a kind of a drag, because it's like a lot of church for like 24 hours. And what I didn't realize, the Sabbath's fun, y'all. Imagine a world city like Paris just stopping for a day. Completely stopping. And you've got children learning how to ride their bicycles out in the middle of busy streets because there's no traffic, and you've got families and people walking to shul, which is their worship, and you got people laughing and cooking out. I asked Edon, I said, what do you do on the Sabbath? He goes, I just lay around and watch sports all day. I thought, I may be Jewish. It's fun. And so if you're in Jerusalem and it's a cold, wet Sabbath, you just get in your car and you just drive down the hill to the Jordan Rift Valley, down there where John the Baptist was. In the wintertime, it's 80 degrees down there. Put your swimsuit on and go swimming. Go swimming in the Sea of in the Dead Sea, rather. Go swimming down there. And in the middle of wintertime, just go down and get a tan and buy some snacks at Fajes and take a ride, go down to the beach. Well, that's crazy. And that's only like by car, maybe an hour away. By foot, however, it's a long way away. And also, by the way, that's just a wintertime story. That's the good news. In the summertime, it's about 120. Okay, all the time. Not just feels like 120. It is 120. Feels like a million. And it's hot and it's dusty and there's big things to bite you down there. And it's desert, but it's not desert like Sahara Desert. It's rocks and you can slip. And John the Baptist is way down there preaching and baptizing, and people are following him because they waited 400 years for Elijah to return. That's why Mark doesn't have anything against Christmas. He just knows that this is really important. God was back in living color. This is what we want the screenplay to say, right? That suddenly, after a long wait, God has got this. And let us remember, if we're ever waiting on anything, even when we can't see, it's coming, right? God's coming. God is watching. God is here. But there's even more, and this has to do with economics. So on the southern steps of the Temple Mount are a lot of these contraptions right here. These are called mikvaot, which is the plural for mikvah, which is a ritual bath. Now, this is fairly new information. We didn't have this information when I was in seminary, and my friend Don, as an archaeologist, has been right in the thick of learning about these. But I would say within the last 20 years or so, they've been finding these things everywhere, all over Israel. Now, it turns out that in the first century, the way that Jewish people worshipped involved water. And this kind of makes sense to me. In a world with very little water, water would be sacred to them. And so they would use water to bathe. They would use water to bathe to purify themselves for periodic times for both men and women, for whatever time you'd need to be cleansed for. And it's hygienic stuff. I don't even have to go into that. But they've got rules and regulations in the books, say the book of Leviticus, when that needs to happen. And so every village would have a ritual bath. By the way, I think Temple Bethel across from Temple Emmanuel has a ritual bath like this. I'm pretty sure Chabad has a ritual bath. It's okay. They still do this kind of stuff today. It's a baptistry. If you grew up in the Baptist church and got dunked like I did, not some little font to sprinkle a baby, you go to the pastor and you go swimming. And so that's the Protestant 21st century iteration of what you're looking at. However, they found tons of these things in Jerusalem. Little village like Nazareth, it only had one. Capernaum would have one. We had one mikvah, but Jerusalem, they're everywhere. They found them down by the Garden of Gethsemane, because the Gethsemane means oil press, and they were making oil for temple use of the service, which confirms that that's the location of the garden. And then they found them all over the temple steps, which means that what you would do, the Temple Mount is sort of the highest place on this little ridge called the city of Jerusalem, which means that it's the Acropolis. We think of the Acropolis as Athens, and that is an Acropolis, but an Acropolis is a temple in the high place. And you would ascend these steps to go to the Temple Mount, but you'd get wet first. That's fun in a world with very little water. Get wet and go in, right? That's a good ticket. So this activity, this is on the southern steps of the Temple Mount where everybody walked up. This activity was regulated by clergy. Now, the clergy in their day was an inherited position, and you were from a certain family, and you would hand it down. And in a world where everybody had very little money, the clergy were set. They lived in gated neighborhoods, and they kept it down home, and they had a life that was set apart. And then the Jewish religion was just crazy. They would go to the city of Jerusalem, to the temple, 3 times a year if you could swing it. If you were poor, you'd just try to make it one, and Passover would be ideally. So Jesus would travel to Jerusalem at least once every year of his life. And people being creatures of habit, I mean, when I sit in church at St. Luke's, I still sit on the left side halfway down. Why? Because it's the first place I sat in an Episcopal Church in 1980. So I know about habits, right? Well, they would ascend the temple steps, and they would wash in these contraptions, and they were regulated by temple clergy. And these guys were rock stars, because you'd go to the same one every year, right? I would, and I'd see the same guy. And they had a title. They were called Baptists. Yeah. Okay, start connecting the dots now. John the Baptist walked away. He walked one day from something that looked like marble sarcophagus guy down in the crack in the earth called the Jordan Rift Valley, down towards something that looked more like Capernaum. He walked away from wealth, and he went down to a little creek that's about the size of the little Kahaba to baptize in something that God made instead of something that human made. He walked away. This would have made first page of the Jerusalem Times. He was set, and yet he walked away, and people wanted to follow him way down in that hot hole so they could find out, what good news did he have to tell them? that God was back in living color. And so what we're going to see in this screenplay from Mark, but also from Matthew and Luke and John, is this upside-down world where the weak are strong and the wise are foolish, and children have wisdom, and life is eternal. We're going to see a world that looks like a life that we don't have to work so hard to make for ourselves or carry on our backs. We're going to see freedom, and this is why Mark starts this way. Now, I will give you a little postscript here. I want y'all to turn with me. I didn't mark a page, but when I find it, to Mark chapter 14. So we think that Mark 14, verse 51, it's on page 828. 828. So we think that Mark, it's a tradition, but I like it, that Mark was dictated by Peter. So that Peter really wrote Mark's gospel, wrote it in Rome. We're pretty sure we're right on that Mark was written in Rome about the time of the destruction of the temple, but that Peter, these are Peter's notes, that Peter gave Mark the material that he had. Why do we think that Peter gave it? Well, Mark's the first one. Let's just use a little power of deduction here. Mark's the first one, and there's a story about Peter in the book of Mark that's remembered in all four gospels. All four. It's the story of Peter's denial of Jesus 3 times. Peter dog-cussed his friend 3 times. Serving girl said, "You're one of those Galileans." Jesus is on trial for his life. It's a hurry-up trial the night before they've got to kill him before the Friday, right? The Friday at the end of the day, the Passover. They're speeding it all up. They're beating him up. The temple police are slapping him around. And a serving girl says, "You're one of his disciples, aren't you?" He said, I don't know the man. He said it 3 times. He denied that he knew him. Well, why would we know the story unless Peter told it on himself? There's no reason. There's no reason for anybody to be around to corroborate or have a written memory or to be accusing or whatever. Only Peter could tell this story on himself. And the reason why he tells it on himself is because of my favorite verse in the whole Bible. We don't have it open right here. I'm going to tell it to you. Mark chapter 16, verse 7. So Mark is my favorite screenplay, and Mark 16:7 is my favorite verse. The tomb is empty on Easter morning. Women come to anoint the body for burial. We'll talk about stuff like that later. Body's not there. There's a mysterious man in the corner, could be an angel. And he says, "Go, tell the disciples and Peter that he's going ahead of you to Galilee." Go tell the disciples and Peter. Don't let Peter go. Peter made a terrible mistake. Peter followed from a distance, and he denied his best friend 3 times. He's in terrible shape. Don't let Peter become Judas. Let Peter know that he's forgiven and that he can become the rock upon which I built my church, because I built it on broken people. I built it on broken people. This morning giving out communion, I had this thought. We had these broken pieces of gnarly little communion bread. And the bread's not gnarly, but it's just all broken and shattered. But, it might be cool one Sunday morning to announce that everybody gets a piece of broken bread. Because that's what we are, right? We're just shards, if we are. But God uses us anyway. Only Peter could tell that story on himself, because nobody else had to know. But he could tell it because he was saved. He could tell it because he was no prize and God took him anyway. That's the power of the screenplay. And then there's a little verse that's only found in Mark. So just imagine 4 gospels, 4 tellings of the story, all of Mark within Matthew and Luke, except for this one little verse. So Mark 14:51. It's in the garden. There's chaos all around. It's night. Judas has betrayed the Lord. There's some fighting going on. There's a sword drawn. A slave's ear gets cut off. And it's terrible. And it says this: a certain young man was following him, wearing nothing but a linen cloth. They caught hold of him, but he left the linen cloth and ran off naked. We think that's Mark. So Peter and Mark telling the story, telling of what they saw in the distance, telling about how scary it was in the garden, telling about how God raised his son on the 3rd day, writing down the greatest story ever told. Okay, 4 gospels, right? 1 story, 4 voices. This is what we're going to do this semester. So that's your introduction to Mark. And we're going to keep that going a little bit. Next week, I'm going to show you some themes that Mark uses to make this screenplay pop. But I'm going to turn this off to see if you have any questions, because we won't record now.